Well, the Trump campaign team wasted no time at the convention and ended months of speculation over his vice presidential running mate. The name alongside Donald Trump's on the Republican ticket will be JD Vance. Recent weeks saw Mr. Vance emerge as a clear favourite. The senator from Ohio used to be a vocal critic of Donald Trump, even calling him an idiot, amongst other things. But he's now fully embraced the MAGA movement. Vance has been criticised for his response to the Trump shooting, posting on X just an hour later that the central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs. That rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination. Well, DW's political team is at the Milwaukee convention. Here's our Washington bureau chief, Ines Pohl, on the choice of JD Vance for vice president.
Yeah, it was, first of all, really interesting that Donald Trump announced his pick through Truth Social, his social media platform. It was kind of underwhelming. Someone expected Donald Trump himself coming on stage, maybe with his pick, but no, he put it out there on Truth Social. But it was interesting to see that people here surrounding us, they really, really love this pick about this young 30-year-old senator from Ohio. He's very conservative when it comes to abortion rights. He's one of the strongest opponents, for example, for Ukraine aid. And of course, he's one who was very critical with Trump. He said he didn't vote for him in 2016, even called him a monster and said that he's America's Hitler. But now, being offered this job, he obviously changed his mind.
That's Ines Pohl. Now, Dr. Andra Gillespie is an associate professor of political science at Emory University. She joins us from Washington. Welcome to DW, Doctor. Let's start with the selection of JD Vance as Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate. What do you think is behind that choice?
JD Vance has proven on the Sunday morning talk show circuit and in other venues that he is a vociferous defender of Trump's agenda. He is very articulate in terms of how he presents that platform, and he exuded a certain level of loyalty. And so one of the things that a lot of people asked in all of the interviews that all of the potential VP candidates went through is how you would respond if it turns out that there's a contested election result, such as Trump tried to attempt in 2020. And JD Vance was actually very articulate in defending his role in that and how he would defend his running mate, if he were, in a position to certify or not certify the results of an election if he were vice president of the United States. So I think those kinds of things really did, help his star rise, if you will, and helped him to distinguish himself from some of the other candidates who sometimes equivocated or who were not always as articulate as he has been in terms of defending the Trump agenda.
And what was behind his conversion, if I can put it that way, from going from being so anti-Trump to being so rah-rah about the former president?
I think that that's certainly an interesting thing, and it's something that will be used against him in the election campaign. But he talks about his own conversion. And I think some people are going to question the motives of doing that. He had political aspirations. It was a way to distinguish himself from other candidates. It was also a way to get Donald Trump's endorsement when he ran for U.S. Senate. And so I think that there are going to be questions about whether or not Vance's conversion is instrumental and opportunistic, or whether it is genuine and heartfelt. But suffice to say, Senator JD Vance has kind of been firmly in the populist wing of the Republican Party. And given his relative youth, he's 39 years old, he could be the face of what populism looks like in American politics for the next generation.
OK, so presuming a Trump victory, or indeed even if Trump isn't victorious, he will be there in 4 or 5 years' time. That's what the Republican Party will look like.
I think he would have a credible case to be made that he is the future of the Republican Party. We're looking at somebody who's a millennial. We're looking at somebody, at a best-selling memoir / cultural critique. We're looking at somebody who's a first-term senator. He is somebody that, barring something catastrophic and tragic happening, is going to be, on the political scene for the foreseeable future.
Let's talk about events of the weekend that were almost catastrophic. Donald Trump, he's not president and he wasn't killed. How do you assess the significance of Saturday evening's attack?
It is still very disturbing and traumatizing that a presidential candidate came that close to death. He's also a former president, so even as a former president, he is entitled to a Secret Service detail. So the idea that somebody got within about 150 yards of shooting him and only missed by, an inch or a few centimeters or millimeters is something that is certainly concerning for our security apparatus. And it also does speak to the tenor and the toxicity of our politics today, that somebody would, feel emboldened to try to attack Donald Trump. Now, we must be clear about the fact that we're still trying to figure out what the motive of the shooter was. And since he was killed by a sniper, we can't interrogate him directly, but the FBI is going through his phone and trying to go through any records that he would have left to try to gain a sense of what actually motivated this particular attack. But this is something that, regardless of one's political affiliation, is something that's disturbing. People should be able to go to political rallies in peace and support their candidates in peace without worrying about getting shot at, whether it's the candidate themselves or the people who were, in the crowd, who unfortunately were shot and in one case killed.
Except that this is not new. Political violence in the United States seems to have been bubbling along for quite a number of years. A representative shot here, a white nationalist killing there, just bubbling along.
Well, I mean, yes, certainly former President Trump isn't the only politician who has been shot at before. He's certainly, sometimes people are shot at because of mental illness. Sometimes people are shot at because of the proliferation of guns in American society. Sometimes people are shot at because of political motivations. But it's still really disheartening and really disturbing to see it. And it's especially disturbing when you recognize that Donald Trump has more protection than most political candidates, than your school board candidates, or even your congressional and Senate and gubernatorial candidates. So this is still, really distressing. And this should be a wake-up call for Americans to tone down the political rhetoric. I think we have to wait to see whether or not that's going to happen. And at least for presidential politics, it's been a long time since we have seen a presidential candidate or a president get that close to being killed by an assassin.
So briefly then, do you think those calls for unity and calm from the two candidates, are they likely to have any effect?
So I have to admit, I am not the most optimistic about that, but I'm going to await data. So I'm talking to you now, which means that I don't have an opportunity to watch the Republican National Convention right now, but I'm going to be paying attention to the speeches. We've heard that most of the speakers have altered their speech to account for the assassination attempt. And so I think the big question is, are we still going to hear defiance? Are we still going to hear othering of Democrats? And when they say unity, what do they mean? Do they mean unity amongst Republicans, or do they mean unity across the country and reaching across the aisle to Democrats? So I think we have to wait to see what they say. And then we're going to be paying a lot of attention to Thursday when Donald Trump gives his acceptance speech. Does he give the type of acceptance speech that is reminiscent of his inaugural address in 2020, which was very dark and very negative? Right. Or does he try to present himself as, the second coming of Ronald Reagan? Right. So I think we're really going to have to pay attention. And we don't know the answer to that question yet.
That's fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it. Political scientist Dr. Andra Gillespie from Emory University. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's get more from Julius van der Laar, who is a political strategist and communications expert. Welcome to DW. So now we know Donald Trump's selection for a vice president, if they get in, is JD Vance. What does that tell us about Donald Trump's future plans?
I think it is going to be a shift to the right. And I think this is important. It is a continuous shift away from the sort of old Republican transatlantic alliance. This is a shift towards rural America. JD Vance has been someone who's always been pushing the rural America agenda. He's, of course, written a bestseller book just when he criticized Donald Trump in 2016, The Hillbilly Elegy. And so he is someone who understands rural America, who understands rural American voting issues, the conservative Midwest, the flyover states that we've often talked about. And so putting him in the VP spot, I think, is a clear signal that Donald Trump is going to continue his America First agenda and going to move away from sort of the transatlantic idea.
Okay. So that's the latest news. The big news, of course, across the last day or so was the assassination attempt. How has that affected the Trump campaign?
Well, I think on numerous levels. One, it's the number one story that everyone is talking about. Hours. I think two, in terms of security, this is going to alter the way the campaign is going to be run. We're seeing outside the Republican Convention Center, Secret Service everywhere, dogs, police on bicycles, helicopters in the air. There's no stone left unturned. So I think this is going to continue throughout this entire presidential campaign for the next 4 weeks or 4 months, I should say. And I think crowds are going to be small and more contained. So I think that alters the race as well. But on top of that, I think Donald Trump now has become the front runner. The way he's positioning himself, also planning to position himself during this convention, at least from what we've heard from him and his campaign, is sort of taken a larger step. He said that he has ripped up his entire convention speech that previously had been planning on tearing into Joe Biden, but now he sort of wants to present himself as the unifier in chief, which I think is a very smart strategy.
And does the attack alter the Biden campaign? It's hard to go for someone who has effectively become a modern day saint.
100%, exactly what you're saying. The Biden campaign planned to go on the offensive this week, of course, attacking Donald Trump for extreme positions. We just heard that, of course, the Biden campaign put out a statement saying JD Vance is extreme. And I think you can make that argument, especially when you take a look at what JD Vance has said about the president inciting this act of violence, which I think is somewhat taken out of context. But I think the Joe Biden campaign has to figure out how they get back on the offensive and can sort of drive their own message, because right now everyone is talking about Trump, the assassination, of course, now about the Republican convention taking place right behind him.
You mentioned Ukraine. If Donald Trump does become president, NATO leaders, of course, are worried about his stance on Ukraine. Tell us more about Senator Vance's position on this issue.
Well, let me just preface this by saying Senator Vance has been all over the place in all type of issues. He said that Donald Trump was completely unqualified. He'd never vote for him. Now, of course, he's becoming his vice president. So let's see and wait what Senator Vance will actually say once he's officially nominated by this convention. But I think he's been clear on one thing, that he believes that American money, taxpayer money, should be spent in America and not somewhere half across the globe over in Europe. He has, of course, been one that has been pushing that Germany and others should be doing more to pay for the war in Ukraine, if that's something that we're focused on, but that no more American taxpayer dollars should be flowing into Ukraine or defense of some foreign country.
Does the attack on Donald Trump, just thinking about the Biden campaign now, does that silence the arguments within the Biden campaign about whether or not the president should continue his bid?
I think if there's, and it's crude to formulate it this way, but Joe Biden has benefited from what has happened the last 48 hours. Why? Because that issue has sort of tamped down. I think nobody knows what's going to happen in the future, but I think we can all expect that there is a likely chance that President Trump's phone numbers are going to go up in the next week or two. And so I think a lot of people are sort of tamping down the notion that Joe Biden should be replaced. Still, I wonder, straight from an analysis perspective, how can Joe Biden in the current state can get back on offense without sort of altering the fundamental dynamics of the race by replacing himself and opening up the way for a new candidate?
Good to talk to you as ever. That's very clear. Political strategist Julius van der Laar. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.